Let's now show you the state of affairs in Kiev in Ukraine right now. Take a look at these visuals. Jam-packed streets, traffic at a complete standstill. These, of course, are visuals coming from the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. Traffic has come to a standstill. This after, of course, the Ukrainian president earlier in the day implemented the martial law throughout the country. This, of course, after reports of explosions rang out through Ukraine, an attack by Russia. The West, of course, has condemned the attack, calling it unprovoked and unjustified. Ukraine has called it the beginning of what is looking like an all-out invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Now, to show you exactly what happened, we, of course, have seen videos being circulated across social media, but we'll now show you an eyewitness account of what transpired in those early hours.
Kyiv is full of smoke. This is a city center. Every 5 minutes, bomb is dropping by Russian army.
Let's now listen in to what the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky earlier said after sounds of explosions rang out through Ukrainian cities.
Dear Ukrainians, this morning Russian President Vladimir Putin announced a special military operation in the Donbass. Russia carried out strikes on our military infrastructure, on our border guards. Explosions were heard in many cities of Ukraine. We introduced martial law throughout the state. A minute ago, I had a conversation with US President Joe Biden. The US is starting to gather international support. Today we need you. Each of you needs to be calm. If possible, stay at home, please. We are working, the army is working. The entire security and defense sector of Ukraine is working. I, the National Security and Defense Council, the government will be in touch. Soon I will be in touch again. Don't panic, we are strong and we are ready for everything and we will defeat everyone. Because we are Ukraine, glory to Ukraine.
Let's now get you up to date with today's developments. Russian President Vladimir Putin earlier announced a military operation in Ukraine early on Thursday, and Ukraine's Interior Ministry later said that Russia's invasion has begun. There were reports of troops crossing the border with multiple directions, and explosions were heard in multiple cities in Ukraine, including the capital, Kiev. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky introduced martial law across the country and has urged citizens to remain calm. Now, we earlier spoke to independent journalist Volodymyr Solohab, who spoke to us about what's happening from Kiev. Listen in to his inputs.
Good morning. Yes, indeed, this is a very troubling morning. Ukrainians have woken up to a totally different country, the country which has been openly invaded by a nuclear power such as Russia. I myself, I woke up at around 5 in the morning to the sounds of explosions here on the outskirts of Kyiv. I also heard the fighter jets flying over, and all of my friends I've been in touch with that are here in Kyiv, they pretty much have the same feeling of anxiety, feeling of concern, and obviously not knowing what to do right now. From the military standpoint, Ukraine is in much worse position than Russia. Ukrainian army, to be honest, has just started emerging in 2014 when it first faced with this Russian military aggression. And even though in the last 8 years, the military capabilities, the preparedness of Ukrainian army has improved, of course, it's nothing to compare with the capabilities of Russian military complex, of Russian military state. At the same time, Ukraine has been asking its Western partners, its Western allies, to impose preemptive sanctions on Russia, even before Russia has invaded. Just a few days ago, when Russia openly declared the independence of these breakaway republics and openly moved in troops there has been first sanctions introduced. I think that right now, Ukrainian government and Ukrainian people will be looking for more sanctions from its allies on Russia as a way to deter Russia now that it started bombing the cities across Ukraine. Well, it's playing a pivotal role, and this is the only reason, the one and only reason why Russia and Russian president is so mad on Ukraine, that Ukrainians have decided that they want to align themselves with the West. They want to align themselves with the European Union. They want to have closer ties with the European countries. They want to have closer ties with NATO and not with Russia. Apparently, judging from this hour-long speech that President Putin gave a few days ago on live television, he still sees Ukraine as being part of Russia, as being emerged out of Russia, not out of the Soviet Union. And of course, this angered him. Back in 2004, Ukrainians had the first revolution, the so-called Orange Revolution, when pro-Russian puppets was trying to become a president by fraudulent elections, by massive falsifications. Back in 2004, Ukrainians did not allow that. We had a different president. Then in 2009, this puppet became the president of Ukraine. We all know what happened with Viktor Yanukovych when Ukrainians had another revolution, another uprising in 2014 to oust this president because of massive corruption, because of massive entanglement of Russia in Ukraine's internal affairs. President Yanukovych had to flee to Russia, where he allegedly is still right now. And starting from 2014, Ukraine has been on this steady path of closer allies with the European Union, closer ties with the European Union, closer ties with NATO. This is something which was angering Putin up until now, where he decided that he has to militarily invade Ukraine.
Let's now show you what's happening in Ukraine. These are, of course, visuals coming from an airbase in Ukraine. And now take a look at this map. This gives us a clearer picture of the cities that were under attack by Russia in Ukraine, that is. Multiple cities were witnessed explosions, Russian attacks launched earlier this morning. And following this, Ukraine clearly called it the beginning of a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Now, these are visuals coming in of students leaving the country, heading to the airport after recent developments. All this after Russia launched an attack on Ukraine earlier in the morning, with multiple explosions heard in different cities, including the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, which is also a prominent student hub, especially for foreign students. And these are visuals showing you what's happening on the streets. After the Ukrainian president imposed a martial law through the country, we can see traffic coming to a complete standstill. Clogged roads, traffic jams. That is what's happening in the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, today. Let's get you up to date with what happened earlier today. Russian President Vladimir Putin announced a military operation in Ukraine. And from what we can see, these visuals give you a sense of the day's developments. Explosions heard in Kharkiv in Ukraine. Students leaving the country in a panic, naturally, after recent developments. All this after the Ukraine President Zelensky introduced martial law across the country, and he urged citizens to remain calm. Earlier, of course, he had tried to call Putin, but that attempt was highly unsuccessful. We're also getting reports of subway stations becoming improvised bunkers in Kiev as people try to leave the Ukrainian capital. These are reports coming in as of now at this hour. We earlier spoke to our correspondent Ollie Barrett from London for the latest updates. Listen in to what he said.
Well, probably more usefully, I can give you some reaction from the UK and talk about possible next steps. We've already heard from UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. He has tweeted to say, "I'm appalled by the horrific events in Ukraine." He says he has spoken to President Zelensky of Ukraine to discuss what he calls next steps. Boris Johnson going on to say President Putin has chosen a path of bloodshed and destruction by launching this unprovoked attack on Ukraine. He says the UK and our allies will respond decisively, and that clearly becomes one of the crucial next questions, how decisively that response can be put into action and exactly what it will be from Western allies. Liz Truss, the UK Foreign Secretary, has reacted as well. She says, "I strongly condemn the appalling unprovoked attack President Putin has launched on the people of Ukraine." Liz Truss going on to say, "We stand with Ukraine and we will work with our international partners to respond to this terrible act of aggression." We've also heard from the UK representative to the United Nations, who was involved in that meeting that was going on essentially as President Putin announced that the war would be beginning. Ambassador Barbara Woodward saying, "As we sat in the United Nations Security Council chamber tonight urging Russia to step back, President Putin announced special military operations on Ukrainian territory." The UK representative saying this is unprovoked and unjustified, and she also calls it a grave day for Ukraine and the principles of the United Nations. One other bit of reaction from UK officials that's worth bringing you is from Melinda Simmons, who is the British ambassador to Ukraine. She calls it also a wholly unprovoked attack on a peaceful country. She says she's horrified, and she says just because you're prepared and thought about this possibility for weeks and months doesn't mean it isn't shocking when it actually happens. And Melinda Simmons, of course, is in country herself. And then going back to where we started this train of thought, Boris Johnson talking about how to respond with allies. Clearly we know that the UK has further sanctions ready to go, as do other Western allies. I'm sure we can therefore expect them to be rolled out at some point in the coming days, if not sooner. Boris Johnson also announcing on Wednesday that further military support would be supplied to Ukraine, and he said that would come in the form of lethal defensive weaponry, a lot of which the UK has supplied already, and other military support for the Ukrainian military too. Exactly what form that will take, the UK government certainly on Wednesday wouldn't say, insisting that it would be a security issue to put too much detail on it. But we do know that, as I say, defensive weaponry has been supplied by the UK to the Ukrainian military for some time now, preparing for just this eventuality.
WION World is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.